Today, the 42nd chapter. 42nd chapter, in one word, liyira, fear of God. Not fear of punishment, fear of what we've learned till now is that God sees us. And because he sees the inner dimension of our being, meaning he doesn't just see us physically, but he knows where our heart is, he knows where our thoughts are, actions, obviously. And as we explained at great length, he doesn't know from something outside of himself. He knows it from within. So he really knows. And that should bring a sense of what we call fear, lower level of fear, which is an awareness of God's presence. And as we've said previously, we know that when someone is in the room, and especially if that person is very important, like a king, who's seeing what we're doing, so we're going to act differently. Not a fear of punishment, but just the presence of, period. And the truth is that any person who would be in a room, we would act differently. They've actually done studies on this, with kids, actually with boys in a classroom. If it's an all-boys classroom and then a girl walks in, all of a sudden they sit up straight and, they have their uniform with a tie, they check it and, and so on. If you need any proof for it. Today, the Alter Rebbe is going to go on a different angle about this whole idea. And it's a lot here. So stay tuned for a meaningful and deep engagement. Well, if a king is seeing me, then what's happening at the same time? I'm seeing the king. Not only is he seeing me, but I'm seeing him, right? So for example, if I know that I'm being filmed by somebody, if there's a camera in the room, right? And I'm being filmed. I'm being filmed actually right now, right? I'm being filmed, and I'm aware of that. So that gives me a sense of awareness of, hey, what I'm saying is being recorded, right? But what happens if it's not just I know that I'm being recorded and someone is seeing me, but what if there's the actual guy with the camera there in front of me, so I'm seeing him, right? This takes things to a new level. Not only does God see me, but I'm seeing the King. I'm seeing God himself. So the metaphor of a king is what the Alter Rebbe uses. Why does a person have fear for a king? So, for example, if the king is sleeping, do you have any trepidation for the king? Not really, because his body is just, so to speak, in the moment, not a lifeless body, but in the sense of being asleep. The king is just a body with a soul that's kind of gone up to its maker, in a sense, right? So why do you have a trepidation for the king? Is because of the soul that encloses the king. Now, it's not for the physical reality of the king, right? But it's, so in other words, what I'm seeing is a physical body of a king. In my mind's eye, though, I know that there is also a soul that animates that body. And that's really what I am having the sense of trepidation before the king. And that's why when he's asleep, I don't really have the same kind of trepidation. I mean, maybe I'd be trepidation because I might wake him up and he's going to get angry at me. I'm not talking, there's a metaphor. So the metaphor is that I'm aware in my mind side that it's the soul, and that's really what gives me the trepidation, as opposed to the physical being of the king, right? Well, if that's the case, and that's a metaphor, remember, what's the metaphor? For God. God We see physical creations of God. Those physical creations are like the body of the king. But what animates those physical creations? What animates the king is his soul. What animates the physical things is God that's vested within it. He's clothed in himself and animates all of creation. So when we think about this itself should give a sense of trepidation, fear of the presence that I'm seeing God. Not only is he seeing me, but I'm seeing him, right? Now, well, you might ask, come on, and the Alter Rebbe is going to forewarn this idea. But if I'm seeing the king, I am beyond a shadow of a doubt recognizing that even when he's asleep, that he's got a soul that animates him, and it's his very soul, is there. And that's what I have no doubt about it. But when I look at the sun, or I look at the moon, or I look at the trees, I look at a forest, I look at a beautiful flower bed, I see a physical thing for sure. But God's presence is so concealed. God reduces the vitality to such a degree that it is not as certain as I see it when I see a physical king and have trepidation before the king. So how do you make the two things really, how do you bring from the metaphor, from the analogy to the analog? There's a great gap. So Alter Rebbe says it's true. There is a gap. God is much more concealed in the physical creation, his physical creation. Therefore, what we need to do, it doesn't take away from the truth, obviously. It's just about how am I going to have, before a king, I'm going to have that trepidation, but before, when I'm looking at heaven and earth, I'm looking at God's creation, it's not going to inspire me in the same way to have that kind of trepidation. So Alter Rebbe says, indeed, and therefore what the essential thing is, we need to train ourselves, to habituate ourselves in our minds, that everything that we see with our physical eye, we need to know that in the mind's eye, that there is the force of God, the vitality of God is vested within it, and that's its true reality and its true existence. Just as the king, true existence as a king is not a physical body, but it's his soul that's vested within him. So likewise, God is vested within all of creation, as the soul vested within the body, and gives it vitality. God is vested within creation and gives it all vitality. And therefore, I need to train myself that constantly to remember that the inwardness and vitality of godliness is what is actually animating the sun, the moon, the tree, the animals, everything in my world. And therefore, when I will constantly remind myself and recognize that, it will bring me to a sense of trepidation, fear, in the sense of that I'm seeing God. Ultimately, God is present in everything. Powerful idea. To give you some other metaphors for this idea. The Russian teacher gets up in the classroom in the times of communism and says, "Students, does anybody see God?" No. Everybody said no. "Students, does anybody can hear God?" No. "Touch God, smell God, taste God?" Well, this teacher says, obviously then the conclusion is there is no God. Little Yankel, who was called Jacques or whatever in the classroom, says, "Teacher, can I ask a question? Students, does anybody see the teacher's brains? Does anybody hear the teacher's brains, smell it, taste it?" I guess the teacher has no brains. In other words, what we see with our physical eye is only what we see with our physical eye. I once told the story to one guy. So he said, well, break open the teacher's brains with a bat and you'll see his brains. No, you won't. You'll see about 2 pounds of mush. Brains? You don't see brains. You're going to take apart, you're going to see, you don't see brains. You don't see intelligence. You see a mind. You see brains. Yes, you see a physical brain. Where's intelligence? You see intelligence there? You don't see intelligence. So there's what the physical eye sees, and there's what the mind's eye knows. So, with seeing the king, it's very obvious. I don't have to work on myself to come to the trepidation. But seeing the world around me, I got to train myself. That what the physical eye sees is not the real, ultimate truth. It's the mind's eye, what it's aware of. And train myself to see that. Now, this idea of habituating ourselves to do this in such a manner, right? Alter Rebbe explains, this is implicit in the very word emunah, which we translate as faith. What does faith mean? So from the word emunah, and this is a very important concept. The word emunah, faith, means, it comes from the root word of an omen, a craftsman. In other words, based on the godly soul that we have a craft. We have a skill. Just as people are born with certain skills embedded in their soul, so likewise the Jewish soul is embedded with a certain skill, and that is called emunah, faith. Faith in what? In God, that there is God. Other faiths also, we will go into that now, but here in this respect, the faith of God. What does it mean, the faith of God? Because God is outside of me? No, because I have a piece of God in me. Since I have a piece of God in me, all I have to do is train myself as a craftsman trains themselves. Because if you have a skill in something and you don't train it, so you have a skill to play the piano or the violin or to paint or to work with your hands, but you don't train yourself to work it, you're never going to develop it. So it's there, but not developed. So the Jewish soul has this capability of being trained that it can perceive God. That it can see the world around it and recognize, based on the soul that is in us, that soul is bound up in God in such a manner that all we have to do is train ourselves to be able to see the world this way. Alter Rebbe concludes his chapter and says that if you can't meditate upon this so much, to think about it and to get yourself, to bring yourself to this kind of trepidation of God, fine. There's a simple, basic idea of what this idea of trepidation is, and that is accepting the yoke of heaven. In other words, I accept that God is the reality of everything. I may not perceive him, and I'm not training myself, and maybe through training myself and seeing doesn't really bring a sense of fear to me. But if the bottom line is, I accept upon myself the yoke of heaven, what God needs from me, what he wants from me, right? So then that's sufficient. That's the why. Because what's the bottom line of all of this? What do I need this for? Be able to see the presence of God just so I can be wowed out of my mind, right? So the drug addict doesn't need drugs anymore. He could, can be psychedelic, whatever, by seeing the world around us. That's not the point. The point of all of this is that it changes our behavior. That we think differently, we talk differently, and act differently. So the whole point of this ultimately is just to bring us that we should take upon us the kingdom of heaven, meaning that I'm accepting God as my ruler, my king, and I'm ready to serve him. Even if I worked on myself to try to perceive him, and as much as I understand it in my mind, it didn't necessarily enter into my heart fully. That's okay. We should still do that. And by doing that, it will give us the capacity to at least accept God as my King. And then be able to serve him as he so wishes. And this is the idea that when we're obedient to God, when we pray by Shemona Esrei and we bend by the Amidah, the silent prayer, and we bow in obedience and acceptance of the heaven of God's kingdom, meaning as God is the King. And that the important point is this brings me to change my behavior. That's all that counts ultimately. I mean, that's, the ultimate powerful idea. If we introduce this into our lives, which I'm sure we are all not learning Tanya merely, but we are living it. Well, we live a different life then. We live a different life. We're different people. We're not the same. And Zelia, good morning to you in Florida. Karen, Boker Tov to you in LA. Una in Iowa. Azmi. Fear God to gain wisdom. Here it's fear God to do good. To be good. To do good and be good. Batya, good morning to you in Montreal, together with David. Hey. Vernette, I think from Georgia, good morning. Christopher, welcome. And Stephanie from Bloomington, Illinois, thank you for joining. And from the Holy Land, who do we have? That's Daniil. Andrew from New Jersey, good morning. Cassie, thank you. Okay, it's too bright for me right now. Jose from Hollywood, Florida. Sandy, good morning. Ernie from Mississippi. Karen from Miami. Tenele, I'm sure I got that wrong. From Saskatoon, fellow Canadian. Russ, thank you. All right, folks, a lot to share. Today is Chav Ches Nisan, the 28th day of the month of Nisan. 29 years ago, our dear Rebbe spoke very powerful words, saying that I have done everything I can to bring Mashiach. And now it's up to you. The Rebbe gave over the reins to us. So we need to bring Mashiach, and the way to bring Mashiach is through the inner teachings of the Torah, which is Chassidus, which is based on Chabad teachings of Tanya, which we're learning here. We have the duty, all of us, to do our part to bring the final redemption, because it's in our hands. That's what our dear Rebbe gave it over to us 29 years ago on this day when he spoke that famous talk that I remember. It was very difficult at the time to apprehend how it's given to us. But then 11 months to the day, the Rebbe had a stroke, and then 2 years plus after that was Gimel Tammuz, and then we kind of got the message. It's in our hands. So, folks, I need your help. I need your help to share this. I need your help also, as I've mentioned before. We need to bring this to a new level. I'm, working on some stuff. So whoever wants to be part of that, some of you have reached out, and I appreciate that. We will definitely be in touch. Private message me, especially with your email. That would be great. And that's it for the moment. All right, folks, let's live what we learn. And I don't say that to you, I say that to myself, because there's a lot here that's powerful stuff. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from my home in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day.